Hello everyone, my name is Jakub Stokalski. I'm the project lead and lead designer at 11-Bit Studios, and my work is mostly focusing on everything relating to Frostpunk. Today I'd like to invite you to a talk about concepts and about ideas and about how they function throughout the development process, and especially the role that they play in every game that we made since This War of Mine, in our particular approach to thinking about what separates an idea from a good idea. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you to my talk about the unbearable lightness of ideas, or when not to look for fun first. Okay, so I'd like to kick this off with something that is obvious for everyone working in game development, and that's the age-old adage that ideas are cheap, right? And everyone can have ideas. I'd like to stop here for a second because, in general that is true in the sense that everyone can come up with things that will contribute to the overall development process, right? Especially if you consider the scope of the genres and of different departments that are needed to develop a game, right? Obviously, everyone can have a great idea that can further the goal of making a great game, right? But I like to focus on the way ideas for games in general work in this talk, and especially, what we'll be talking today might be most relevant probably out of the gate for small teams and medium teams that live and die by the fact whether the ideas stick, right? And whether the ideas for games are different enough to warrant funding and warrant success in the marketplace. But also in larger scale teams, it is important to really truly distill what you're trying to achieve, right? And I will not be touching mostly on things that relate to these development, day-to-day things and creativity that goes into making a modern video game, but actually on the idea with a capital I is asking what is it exactly that we're making and why are we making it? The background for this is obviously the fact that we as 11-Bit Studios we have a history of going from innovative games like Tower Offense, defining the Tower Offense genre with Anomaly series, but then when we reached the threshold of doing This War of Mine, it suddenly became obvious to us that to develop a project of such a level of sensitivity, at such a level of tonal delicacy, you really need to be conscious about what is it exactly that you're making. And obviously, this has very important ramifications for the success of a team that's making it and the company that this team is embedded in, right? Because we are all asking ourselves this question: how not to die in this marketplace, right? In the sense that we are making games to keep making games at the very least, right? And that is true for the smallest indies all the way up to the biggest publishers, right? This is a creative industry, the one that needs to bring a profit, right? So the question is, how do you remain relevant, and what sparks on the other side? What boosts your creative spark, right? And obviously, the answer to this question is the most overused word in the history of creative industries, and that is innovation, right? And what really is innovation, right? I really like this very simple definition that innovation is really making new stuff that doesn't suck, right? So coming up with new stuff is the easy part, right? In the sense of having ideas and having propositions, concepts that are not really relating to anything that we have. You might seem as this easy part, but then if you try to embed it into this whole process, complicated, complex process of making a modern video game, then this ideas that doesn't suck part is when it gets really tricky, right? Because what really does it mean that something doesn't suck, right? Where do these ideas come from? What parts of them are important is the question that you should be asking. And obviously, when you're talking about innovation, so new ideas that move the medium or the game or the product forward, you could ask yourself, where do these ideas come from, right? Do I have to focus on some parts? Obviously you get different departments and different avenues, and you yourself as the creator, you have different optics on what is important in a given product, right? So you are not operating in a vacuum here. So this is an age-old, chicken and egg problem sort of game development. Of innovation in what area really is important, right? So obviously, to simplify it to the extreme, right? If we say that art, design, and technology are the constituent parts of making a modern video game, then obviously you can think of innovation, so new ideas that push it forward in all of these areas, right? Probably a lot of games that innovate in the art department, right? That are striking because they have this visual metaphor or visual tools that they deliver a completely different experience, right? But then obviously you get other points of view which say, well, without good gameplay, the graphics don't matter, or this is pretty much a classic, right? The graphics don't matter, it's the gameplay what matters, etc. And you could say, well, yeah, there's some truth to this statement in the sense that you're not, playing video games to look at pretty pictures, at least not predominantly. So obviously it should be the ideas and the creativity in the gameplay and the design department that drives the thing forward, right? Yeah, well, but then you could take the third thing into account, the underlying technology, and you could argue, and you'd be pretty right about it, that without proper technology underneath it all, no ideas, no creativity, either in art or in design, would be really possible to the scale that it's currently delivered in the video game, in the video game industry, right? Whether it's a new shader that brings everything to the next level, or whether this is a new system that allows you to bring complex simulations into play, all of these things are underlying in technology, and you could argue that, technological advancement and technological innovation was at the heart of some of the most breakthrough things happening on the product side, right? Like Doom, for instance, on moving to 3D. These things are important. So why am I talking about all this? Because at least that's my experience. When we're talking about creativity and ideas and the way the role they play in game development is very often focused on one of these three levels, right? It's either, well, okay, we'll have this striking visual identity and we'll make this game based on this striking visual identity, and it's going to be successful. Or we have this really cool gameplay hook, right? We're gonna like kill this or that genre with it, right? And we're gonna own it. Or I have this technological quirk. I came up with this super cool algorithm, right, that will solve something, and it will enable us to do amazing things, right? And my experience with this approach is that it's really not that productive if you think about formatting the product as a whole, right? Formatting the vision of what you want to achieve with the game itself, okay? All of these areas are super important. All of them play a critical role, and some of them might be even enabling the things that I'll talk about in a second. But in isolation, they don't really give you the value that they should. Okay, and that's because it's a simple reason, right? Because the player experience is really indivisible, right? When you give the game to the gamers and they play it, they don't appreciate it in separation. They don't look just at art or just at gameplay or just at technology. Even more so, you have very different audiences, right? You have audience that is super, receptive to the way things look, or super hardcore genres that, just live or die by gameplay, okay? So you do not get to divide it so neatly and say, okay, I'm gonna do this, and then everything's going to work out for this game. So what I'd like to do today and show you a different perspective of thinking about the vision of the game and this grand idea of the game that will put all of these things, the art, the tech, and the design parts in context. And will give you, hopefully give you a tool, as it is a tool for me and all of our people here at 11-Bit Studios, to truly orient yourself when you're in the thick of it, of making day-to-day decisions during development, but also when judging whether an idea for a game as a whole is really worth pursuing. So this really basically boils down to the fact that it is true to some extent, this saying that ideas are a dime a dozen, right? You can get lots of ideas and it's actually the implementation that matters. There is some truth to this, but there is truth to the fact that good ideas are worth literally millions, right? When all is said and done. So this talk, for the purpose of this talk, I'd like to just for us to be easier to orient ourselves when we're talking about the concepts that I want to show to you today, is to talk about concept. Okay, because concept to me is this word that really encompasses that it's something more concrete than idea that carries all of this burden with it of ambiguity and different levels of scale and all of the things that I was talking about up until this point. Okay, so a concept to me is something that glues all of this stuff together, and this is really what I like to talk about today. So yeah, this talk is going to be about concepts and how we use them here at 11-Bit Studios, in particular to define the vision for our games, and this definition of vision then becomes a compass for us throughout the development process of making all of the myriad, small-scale decisions and ideas that form, to judge them, their value, and see how they work within the larger framework of the game as a whole. So you might ask, after this introduction, what really is a concept, right? What's the difference between the concept and an idea? And granted, this is not mathematics, right? We're not going to be defining super precise terms here, but I'd like to frame it so that hopefully it'll be clear enough that you know what we are really talking about here. And naturally, because we are confined to the format that we're in, and we will be talking naturally within a time box, I'll try not to overtake my time box too much here, but by these limitations, we'll be focusing just a couple of aspects of concepts here at 11-Bit Studios that I think are very important and are universal enough for regardless of the team size you're in or the business, the part of the business that you're in, that is going to be worthwhile, to look at this. So I would like to take a look at basically 4 parts of concept development, that the process that we are doing here internally at 11-Bit Studios. These 4 parts are constituent, and to me they're actually the most important part. The further we'll go along, you'll see the finer detail we're going into, but it all stems from these first steps and having them defined clear enough so that you can, really truthfully say that you have vision for what you want to do. These 4 things are as follows. It's the first thing is the insight, right? The second step is having a statement that relates to this insight. When we have a statement, then we need to be able to pose a question relating to this statement, because we are making games, not linear media. And then when we can pose a question, an interesting question for the player to solve, only then we're moving to the gameplay layer and saying, well, okay, how is this game going to ask and explore this question? Okay, so first things first, let's start with the insight, okay? Some of you might be familiar with the term because it's often related, it's present in other creative industries such as marketing, right, or other product development avenues. But we really, and this is, I'll be talking from the perspective of our concept development process. But I'll try to generalize it for you as much as possible so that you can use it wherever you are, pretty much. So the insight part for us at 11-bit Studios is really related to the mission of our team as a whole, right? The mission is a big word, but this is really what's, spins our creative wheels here at 11-bit Studios. And, this really stems from truthfully, from the success of This War of Mine. And the fact that after making this type of game, which was a grueling experience that was not really fun. It was engaging, but it wasn't fun. And it was expanding this language of games to us. After making this particular game, there was no really going back to just making whatever batch 3 games, right? With all my respect to these types of games, it's just it wasn't who we were, right? So after making this game and seeing how it resonated with the players, it became clear to us that we really like games that are, commenting on reality, on humanity, on society, games that focus on emotions, relationships, dreams, and life in general, right? Games that touch some truth that is true for life and for the human condition. So, with that in mind, when we are talking about concept development internally, there is something always that we want to, start the creative process from, and that's the insight, right? So it's basically the question of what truth about reality sparks your creative wheels, right? What non-trivial observation you'd be willing to make to base your game vision on, and that is true to us. Obviously, it might not be true for everyone in the sense that it's not everyone's ambition to make the types of games that we're making, but still, this insight, this very core of the idea is crucial to understand it and to define it in separation from the actual implementation, in separation from art, in separation from design, technology, and whatever else is important for the actual development of it. It's just that you have a very clear idea why is it that you're trying to make what you're making, okay? So I'll just give you a couple of examples, and it's going to be basing on our experiences with This War of Mine and with Frostpunk in particular, so the game that I spent the most time on. So this insight for This War of Mine was actually very simple, but also very profound. When you think about war games, in particular, they follow a pretty defined format, right? You play a soldier of this or that denomination, and you just shoot headshots all around, right? But this observation that is true is that in war, not everyone is a soldier, okay? And the experience, this part of the experience of the truth of the human condition was not really represented in games before to a large enough scale, I'd argue, right? And if you think about it, this observation that in war not everyone is a soldier really defined the whole road forward for this project, right? It's when Grzegorz Miechowski, our CEO, came one day and asked this question, what if we made this game about civilians in wartime? That was really the moment that this insight aligned everything else that happened after this. Frostpunk came next after the success of This War of Mine, and it was a time of a bit of soul searching for us at 11-bit Studios, obviously. But we were seeking to make a sort of a spiritual successor to it, but not a direct sequel, because we really thought that an experience like This War of Mine is not really something that needs to be serialized, right? It's out of respect of the subject matter. So, but then, if we wanted to make a spiritual successor, then, other questions come to mind, right? And if you're thinking about survival, a topic of survival, basically, as it was, very much the core of what worked in This War of Mine, is that you could argue in an apocalyptic scenario when, there is mass dying-offs all around, then really what matters is survival at scale. Right? It ultimately doesn't really matter if any individual survives if we are talking about the survival of a species. Okay? And this observation became the founding point for thinking about concepts that grew to be Frostpunk. Well, okay, if we have the insight, something that is inspiring to us, but also true, and something that's sparking possibly some conversation. Because if you think about the inside of Frostpunk, survival matters at scale. It's something that you can argue and talk about. It's not immediately obvious, right? That's a sign that you have something there, and it's not. I'm not talking about controversy. I'm talking about really, deep discussion that you can have either with yourself or your coworkers. But then if you have that, then what of it, right? That's the next, that's the next part. And that's actually the statement part that we're coming to. And, this is basically asking yourself, okay, so if I have this observation of the world, how if I'm thinking about making a game, how will it really capitalize on this insight, How does the genre I'm thinking about, maybe the world, that I'm thinking of setting this game in, maybe the creative vision, the art vision, or the technology that I'm thinking about, how will the rules of this game support the exploration of the subject matter? Okay, it's not really about getting any concrete stuff just yet, but think about what is it that you want to say regarding that relates to this insight that you just that got you going in the first place. And in the case of this war of mine, this was an orienting statement, is that if we are talking about coming from a position that we just observed, realize that we are in the game industry, that really there are no really games of, set that comment on the fact that not everyone is a soldier during wartime, then maybe the statement that what really we want to make the game about is, what we really want to do is a survival game about civilians in wartime, okay? And if you take a closer enough look, then if there are some concrete consequences of stating it like this, right? If we were talking about a survival game, then you just sort of define a genre, right? You don't need to be beholden to it and take all of the cliches of the genre for granted. You need to be challenge it creatively when you develop it, but then it still needs to be a survival experience, because that is what is true for this particular insight, right? This is what is true about, making a truthful experience about being a civilian in a besieged city, right? And the second part about, civilians in wartime, we're not going to be talking about soldiers here, at least not as the main heroes. Obviously, they're going to be there because that's part of the world that we are setting the game in, but it's not going to be mostly about this, And if you define the statement like this, a survival game about civilians in wartime, then suddenly you have a very concrete framework for working forward, right? For talking about art, for talking about technology and design decisions that will deliver on this statement of vision here. So you can, out of this, that it'll be easy to define things like, well, we're going to have a shelter. That will be probably sheltering in because we are in a siege scenario, so we need to stay in place. We know that the resources will be a problem. It'll be running out, so we'll need to go out scavenging. And we know, since it is about civilians in wartime, that a big component of it will be people, not actors, not agents, not simulation AI, whatever. People, right? We really want to touch on this emotional aspect, this true emotional aspect of the experience of actual people in a horrific scenario like this. So that was this war of mine, a statement of this war of mine. And let's take a look at how it shaped for Frostpunk. So the statement for Frostpunk was, if we are talking that, observing that, survival matters at scale if you have an apocalypse going, right, then maybe Frostpunk will be a society survival game where you build the last city on Earth. It seems like, obviously it did not just pop into being just like this, right? It was a process of arriving at framing it like that, because the setting of Frostpunk is less obvious and less self-defining to what it was for this war of mine. So there was a lot of more of actually looking for this fictional frames for delivering on this insight. But then if you frame it ultimately like a society survival game where you build the last city on Earth, then suddenly you did just the same, right? You decided that since we were talking about scale, we're not talking about individuals anymore. We're talking about a society. We are still talking about survival, right? So a society survival, we just invented a genre, which is good, I guess. We'll see throughout the next 3 years, how that goes for us. and about the last city on Earth. This emanation of society and its workings. And if you examine the statement that you just made, then again, you start to see clear patterns of what the game should the shape that it should take, right? You'll need a city building aspect, and again, that defines kind of the genre that you're in, and so that's good, right? You have a very concrete framework that you're moving in. We know that it's going to be about society, and in particular about managing this society, because if we want to say that a society survives, society is not about any one individual, it's about the common shared rules and values and beliefs that define the people, right? So that's what you're gonna be making the game about. And again, the survival aspect, right? All of this is within this framework of asking, how far are you willing to go to survive, right? Yeah, so obviously these all sound very neat when I put them like this, but it took a lot of work and a lot of purely creative, abstract work trying to define them so clearly. But if you do the work at this level, if you dedicate yourself to distilling the idea that you have into these statements that you can really fight for, literally. If someone challenges, the definition that you just made, then you really feel that, even though you can see where he's coming from, you can defend your idea, then that is the moment where you have something concrete that you truly believe in, right? And I can tell you, this often is very subjective. That's the part. You can say that, it's often being said that making games is a creative endeavor, and it's a large team, so it's not really room for individualism and everything. But if you are the one making these types of concepts, these types of definition, then this is really your unconscious speaking. Your unconscious creator within it. And I find it hugely satisfying to be, have this clear level of authority control over either a game as a whole and the whole product, or part of the game if you're, one designer working on part of the game, and then truly going through all of these steps to truly understand what is the role that the thing that you're currently designing within the larger framework of the game as a whole. Okay, so moving forward, we have the statement. So what now? Well, we are not making linear entertainment. Okay, we are not making a movie or a book about all of these insight statements, everything that we did, right? The definition, I argue that games are interactive. That's why they're different. I would challenge you on this. Because other media are interactive if you take into account anticipation or interpretation. But it is true that the player is the co-author of the linear narrative that comes out of the experience of playing the game. And you can really be only the co-author if it's not just predefined content that you need to consume, but if there are some decisions for you to make to decide on what on the final shape of this narrative and on the experience. So it is very useful when you're talking about defining creative concept development within game development to be able to ask questions to the player. Okay, so it is basically your core insight and the statement that you have redefined into what questions will the player need to answer when he's playing the game. And obviously you can go into detail here, but at the very early stage of defining a vision for the whole game, it is very useful to think about these defining questions for the totality of the experience. And in the case of this War of Mine, it was, how far will you go to ensure your survival, right? You are in a besieged city, in a very, tough, real world, very, very grim scenario. And the harrowing experiences of real people in these scenarios was really often about these difficult choices that they need to make to ensure that they actually survive in this place. And in the case of Frostpunk, it was, again, a spiritual successor and all of that, and the scale is different. So what society is capable of when pushed to the limit. And this is the defining question that not only serves to really clearly communicate what the game is about to everyone who's interested, from stakeholders within the company, the team, if you need to orient the team, new team members, new hires, but also publishers, and marketing the game as a whole, right? These are the things that define the experience. These are the things that you are actually selling to the players and saying, well, this is what we made for you. What do you think? If you have these questions defined, then you can really say that you know what you're doing, right? And then, only then, in my experience in making these types of games that we are talking about here, only then it is useful to start talking about the practicalities of gameplay, or practicalities of technology, art, and all of the other stuff. How you can use these tools, use these avenues to build up what you just defined for the game and for the experiences as a whole. So if we're talking about gameplay, as I'm the lead designer and talking about working with designers mostly, is the gameplay. What are the core gameplay mechanisms and how are they connected to your insight? How the decision spaces that you're constructing will ask the question that you just defined in the previous step, right? So obviously for this war of mine, it was survival was obviously the genre and the framework that we were moving in, but we really wanted to focus on the team that was making this war of mine really wanted to focus on the particular part of survival is of making difficult choices. Okay, it's not about whether you have 5 wood to burn in the stove, even though you do need to have this layer, to have this the machinery of the game working and engagement to stem from the systems, right? You need to engage the player. Then really the uniqueness of the experience will stem from the difficult choices, right? And for Frostpunk, again, it was a slightly different scale, but since it is a spiritual successor, the scope and the approach and tonality was quite similar in that we needed to have city building component because we defined it as realizing the vision within the last city on Earth. So we needed to have, obviously the genre of city building and to explore this part. And we knew we needed to have the survival component here because it's the end of the world. But again, if we are talking about the uniqueness of the experience, then we are talking about the difficult choices about society. About society meaning different groups of people and the sacrifices that these groups need to make in order to survive and to build a worthy shelter of the last city within the context of this apocalyptic scenario. And again, these are very broad strokes, obviously, right? And they are pretty well defined because I have the luxury of looking back at the last 5 years of developing Frostpunk and being to clearly name these things, right? And I can tell you that when you're making it in the midst of it, it's not as clear, right? But it's even more important now when we are developing lots of really cool stuff at 11-bit Studios right now, both internal projects and publishing projects. We really make an effort to define these things and to be sure every step of the way that they are what we want them to be. And if we see a misalignment there, to take the time to align again, either the game or the insight. Actually, the concept part should not really be nearly as volatile as changed as the part that you're actually implementing it, because obviously it stems from the fact that this is what you'd set out to make. Okay. Right. So to sum up again, all of these steps that I just talked about, the insight, the statement, the question, and gameplay, is really trying to put into words and into concrete framework the things that you need to be able to say, I have an idea, at least here internally at 11-bit Studios. You really, if you're talking about new concept development at 11-bit Studios, then you really need to know either all of these things if you're talking about selling a new, coming up with an idea for a new game, or whether if you're working within a game, then you need to know how the stuff that you're doing relates to all of this stuff, right? How the game vision propagates into different disciplines that make it. And you could say that this sounds kind of like formalistic in the sense that sounds like a checkpoint. It really is not. In the sense, I truly believe that making new stuff is a process of discovery, and you need to talk to your unconscious to be able to do something truly extraordinary, right? There is no formula for making great stuff. However, in this whole messy process of creativity and creation, you do need a way to orient yourself. Otherwise, you're gonna go into the woods, right? Sometimes you need to do this to uncover a great treasure, right? But other than that, when you need to allow yourself to be open to unexpected surprises, other than that, you generally need to know where you're going, and even more so if you're working with a large team that needs to align to the vision, right? That needs to know how the parts they're working on, how do they fulfill this vision. So that's the way I look at these things that I was talking about now. And if you do the work here, you'll have a tool that will able you to define what you're working on in a clear way. You'll be able to challenge it yourself. You'll be able to challenge it with your coworkers and with your team. And you will have a great answer, at least you should have a great answer, when you show this thing outside, to the question of, why should people care about your game, ultimately? And this is not to say that all of the other stuff, the low-level decisions, they don't matter. To the contrary, right? Technical innovation sparked amazing games, and art innovation sparked amazing games, as well as design innovation, right? All of these innovation, so new ideas within all of these disciplines, sparked great stuff, and they are all super important, right? But if you are making the types of games that we are making, and again, our idea is to make games, make entertainment that is meaningful, so that means something to you and to the audience, right? Then you need to know why is it worthwhile, to make this particular game. Why is it going to be meaningful? And you need to be able to tell it to others. If you don't do that, then all you have is still just the unconscious talking to you. Now you need to take this unconscious and be able to translate it to all of the others who will work with you and who you hope will enjoy the thing that you're making. So I guess that wraps it. Obviously this is not the whole package in the sense, due to time constraint, this was the gist of it, right? And obviously it's not the only way to do stuff. I wouldn't, be as prideful to claim that that's the way you should be doing. But to me personally, and a lot of the teams at 11-bit Studios, this approach and this way of thinking about things was really helpful to really, put a magnifying glass to your creativity and to find what really your voice is about in the game that you're trying to make. Because ultimately, and that's, to wrap things up, is my personal view here, is that, the business really is mature. There are some, talk about, it's still a young industry, etc. It is young, obviously, right? But to me, it's obvious. There will be no Citizen Kane of games, right? Either there was one, or it's really an invalid question to ask within the confines of game industry. So it is. I very much feel that it is true that we as creators need to start to watch our tongue in the sense of saying things that truly are worthwhile. And in this sense, all of the things that I talked about really help us and help me to speak the truth. And I hope they will help you as well. Thanks a lot.